Hi there, I'm Natasha, and this is the Parents of Mouth Breathers podcast. It's a place for parents who are done being dismissed and who are finally ready to get some answers in relation to their child's airway health. So, today I just wanted to say something in relation to a recent post that I put out on Instagram, which was all about this idea of gentle parenting and all these modern sort of parent techniques, which I'm fully sort of into, but how effective they can be if ultimately your child isn't breathing or sleeping properly. So it feels like a bit of a relief to me, this realization that no matter how many scripts you run through and how many of the practices that you put into place, if your child ultimately is dysregulated because they aren't getting the sleep that they need, then you're sort of weighing in the way. And to me, that does feel like a relief. I've tried so many things over the years, and without going into too much detail, just out of respect for wanting to maintain a sense of autonomy for my son, there are definitely behavioral issues that are harder to pin on obvious things. And so when it comes down to it, I have fully landed on the realization that I know that he's got sleep apnea. I know he's a mouth breather. He's got sleep disordered breathing. He's chronically congested. He's got allergies. His whole nervous system is effectively inflamed. Of course, that's going to have an effect on lots of things, not least his behavior. And so therefore, maybe giving myself a little bit of a break when it comes to the fact that some of these principles that I've tried to implement aren't necessarily as effective as they would be should he be sleeping, healthily. So even though gentle parenting, respectful parenting, which whatever you want to call it, is a beautiful idea, it certainly is heads and shoulders above sort of the old school way of parenting, in my opinion, that shouting down a child and putting them down and saying, well, you've got to do this because I said so, and actually treating them maybe a bit more like a human being. It is still very difficult to try and square that circle when your child is dysregulated for reasons outside of the general typical, just being triggered by life events and generally being immature and not having skills to deal with their emotions. See, from my experience anyway, most modern parenting advice is built on the assumption that kids are basically well, that they're well slept, well fed, neurologically regulated. And then with that assumption, it sort of suggests that you can adapt how you parent them to thrive, which is a lovely idea. As I said, I'm all for it. But it doesn't hold, and it certainly doesn't work if your child is mouth breathing through the night and waking up in fight or flight every morning. And I know like that must sound like a really small thing. Oh, like loads of kids snore. I get that all the time. Or he just has like big tonsils and yeah, he's a bad sleeper, but he'll grow out of it. I've heard it all before over and over again. And I wish that I could just believe all of this stuff and lean into it. But the reality of it is, it's deep down, there's something wrong. And if you're listening to this, you'll know that too, because you're seeing your child, the tiredness, the meltdowns, the hyperactivity, poor focus, constant waking, and you're trying with every ounce of your being to respond sort of gently to like behaviors that ultimately feel unrelenting. And you're no doubt like myself still trying to co-regulate when your own sleep is being shredded because you're being so affected by the ripple effects of your child not sleeping properly. I'm often left wondering why nothing seems to stick. We make a little bit of progress, but ultimately the escalations, particularly in reactions with my son, oftentimes I just look on at him and he just seems very unable to come from a place of calm. And I think that a lot of that is he's chronically exhausted. And again, being in that fight or flight, I really sense that in him. And that's the bit that really kills me, to be honest, is just how much pressure we put on ourselves to fix it all with better parenting and different scripts and more empathy and more understanding. But, that sort of is the suggestion, like we're the variable holding this whole thing together. But, I've really come to the stage where I'm questioning, well, what if we're not? What if, even unintentionally we've been gaslit? I don't know whether that even makes sense, but, systematically into believing that, all this behavioral chaos is always about discipline or attachment or parenting style, when sometimes for some children it might just be about the basics, which are oxygen, sleep, airway, and general anatomy. This has recently clicked for me, that no parenting script will land on a brain or work for a child that's underslept and ultimately not getting the oxygen they need. Surely, logic sort of says to me that you can't really coach a nervous system that's in this survival mode. And obviously, when I say this, I'm not wanting to come across like I'm giving up in any way. It's not that at all. I just think parents of children who mouth breathe and have sleep disordered breathing need to zoom out a lot more. We need to look at the whole child, questioning things like, are they breathing through their mouth? Are they snoring? Are they tossing and turning? Do they wake up tired? Are they always congested? Things like if they've been assessed for tongue tie or general ENT stuff like tonsils and adenoids, which is actually interesting that I have a podcast coming out in a couple of weeks. I recently interviewed an airway dentist, and this person specializes in tongue and lip releases. And we go into this actually in some detail. I need us as parents who have children that are suffering with these things to not be looking at them necessarily in the same way that parents who don't have children that suffer with these are, because those scripts and those parenting techniques are going to work much better for those children if they're not having disturbed sleep. As parents of like exhausted children, we know that that shapes their life, it shapes how they receive the world. And so we are at a disadvantage in that sense. It's difficult already having young children and dealing with all the emotions and all that kind of stuff. But if on top of that their sleep is being inhibited, we have to look at this differently, in my opinion. I just really am crying out for some of these parenting specialists to add that layer of context. I know this sounds like just another thing to sort of worry about, another layer of research to think about, more appointments and more advocating. And if you're anything like me, and sort of the people I speak to is predominantly mums that are driving this thing. But for me, it has sort of weirdly felt like a little bit of relief, because once I started seeing the physical and biological side of things, I could stop making everything sort of about me and what I was doing wrong, and I could stop blaming myself for not being like calm enough or patient enough or consistent enough. I could stand back and sort of say, hang on, like his behavior isn't a reflection on my parenting, he isn't a bad kid, and all that sort of nonsense that gets put on kids a lot. It is actually a reflection of how little rest his body is getting. And it changes things. It allows us to be a lot more compassionate and, see our child as somebody that's actually really struggling, rather than somebody that's trying to like cause us just an absolute headache. And obviously, this is not to say that for any reason that we ditch, sort of gentle parenting or these modern parenting techniques if they resonate with us. It just means that we're able to put it into context, and we can stop treating like parenting advice like it's gospel, and start really looking at our kids like whole people with complex needs. It also means, I suppose, that we get to choose which bits of the parenting philosophies that we carry forward and which bits we sort of like, if something feels performative, like for me, a lot of the time, some of these scripts they don't feel natural to me, or something feels like punishing or impossible given your sort of like family's reality, then it's okay to leave it. There's no sort of like medal at the end of all of this for like emotional perfection. In fact, studies show that actually perfect parents wouldn't necessarily be ideal for their kids either. So I just suppose I want to wrap this up as a really quick one this week, but just to say that sometimes the kindest thing you can do is trust your instinct, especially if it's telling you that something deeper is going on. And maybe it isn't you, maybe it's not your technique or your tone of voice or your bedtime routine. Maybe you've got that all absolutely nailed down. And for a child that isn't going through the same issues as yours, it could just be the magic. For your kid, it might just be a breathing issue or a sleep issue, because behind sleep and breathing issues is a nervous system that needs support effectively. I just wanted to give that to you to relieve myself of some of this pressure that I put on myself to be like this perfectly attuned mum and whatnot. You're not failing, you're trying to figure it out, and you're probably doing a lot better than you think. So anyway, I'm going to wrap up now. As I said, I'm Natasha, and this is Parents of Mouth Breathers. If this resonated and you know another parent who's trying all the gentle parenting techniques in the world, but they're just not sticking, perhaps this could be helpful for them. Another way to sort of reframe it might not be a behavioural issue, it might actually be a breathing or sleeping issue. So yeah, I will leave you there and speak to you soon.